Okay, got to make sure that I know what I'm doing with the clicker really quick before we get started. Okay, cool. Just had to make sure. So good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. I would like to begin by first acknowledging that being present in the room matters. And foster care touches every corner of our communities, families, schools, healthcare systems, courts, and policy. And today is about awareness, but awareness only matters if it leads to understanding. And understanding only matters if it leads to better outcomes for children and families. Today I'm going to be presenting on mental health, empowering the future of care. And you know, when we talk about mental health and foster care, we're not talking about something abstract or optional. Mental health is not an add-on service. It's the foundation that determines whether young people survive disruption or recover from trauma and build sustainable futures. And today I'll be speaking from two different places, two scopes: my lived experience in foster care and my professional role as a mental health therapist. I also want to share that when I kind of talk about the things that I'm going to mention today, I'm also speaking from the perspective of someone that has lived and breathed foster care for over a decade. I aged out of care and then went to college in Washington and realized I had a lot of baggage that I hadn't unpacked yet. And so I transitioned back to Boise, where I started working on my social work degree and got my bachelor's in social work. But I also worked for the state for a couple years because after being a part of the system, I was like, I want to see what it's like on the other side. What are the policies that inform? How do we navigate such a large system? So while I'm not representing anyone, I'm speaking from my lived experience, got to put that caveat in there. It does inform my work and how I show up in the community. So before we begin, as a therapist, I think that it would be wrong if I didn't start us in a quick kind of grounding activity. So before we go any further, I'd like to invite everyone for a brief moment of grounding. So whether you're online or if you're here in the room, I'd encourage you, if you're comfortable, to close your eyes for a quick second and place your feet flat on the floor. Now take one slow breath in and one slow breath out. Nothing to fix, nothing to solve, just arriving fully. You may now open your eyes, and this is just one of the simplest trauma-informed practices that we can offer, and it works for all ages. Mindful breathing and grounding is actually so incredibly important so that we can be aware and present. And I have to do it at least a few times a day just to navigate and get through my role as a therapist, which is so amazing to be able to work with so many different people from different walks of life and kind of share a little bit of their story and learn about them and learn about myself. Sometimes I actually joke with coworkers and say, you know, sometimes when I'm in a session, I obviously don't let the client know, but sometimes it feels like there's a mirror in front of me and I'm like, oh, this is cool. I'm like having to think about how I show up. So it has been such a great experience. So before we get into the more clinical aspect, I want to offer a little bit about my foster experience. So, you know, it's interesting as how my story has changed over time. Trauma has a way of kind of blocking memories, or you forget things, and then they like to sneak up on you as you're making progress and learning more about yourself. So I entered care right before my 13th birthday, but before that, I actually lived in kinship care. So what that is essentially where a family member cares for a youth because the biological parent isn't able to. And so when I was about 4, I had a family member take and receive guardianship of me. And from ages 4 until about 12, or 4 until 18, when I aged out of care, I actually lived in over 20 different placements. So imagine in a span of, I can't math because I'm a social worker, but in a span of over 10, 12 plus years, I lived in 20 different places. That's 20 different times I had to pack my stuff. That's 20 different times I had to change placements, whether it be a family member who I wasn't familiar in the home or a complete stranger that was in foster care. And my story isn't really unique. Like, yes, I don't think that most youth in care experience that many placement changes, but every change is having to learn something completely new. So while my story isn't unique, what I experienced in foster care, uncertainty, instability, and emotional adaptation, it mirrors experiences of many young people in care. What is different, though, is that I had access eventually to support, relationships, and opportunities that literally changed my trajectory. And that's why mental health access matters. So uncertainty lives in the body. For children in foster care, uncertainty doesn't just live in thoughts, it lives in your body. Not knowing where you'll sleep, who's gonna pick you up after school, what the rules are going to be, shoes on or off. And it also shapes how your nervous system develops. So you learn to read rooms quickly, who is safe, who is not safe. You learn to stay alert, to anticipate quick or unexpected shifts. And these are survival skills, but they often get mislabeled or pathologized later. Mental health has helped me, and being able to engage in mental health services has helped me to learn that coping skills and some of maybe the maladaptive behaviors that I had, and maybe they once served me to keep me safe, that I could lay them to rest and allow to focus on my healing. And so that's another reason why mental health is so incredibly important and should remain integral into the care of youth that are in the foster care system. You know, as I was preparing this presentation, I was thinking about going into foster care right before I was a teenager. There's all these things going on in your head, you're developing hormones, all the stuff. And you know, growing up in consistent crisis, which is what I experienced before, and sometimes when I was in care, there were times when I would be in a foster home, and looking back, I'm like, oh, I was the problem. I was the common denominator in this situation. And I share that because when you're constantly in a state of fight or flight in your household, and you get to a placement that probably for someone who hasn't experienced a lot of trauma, it feels safe. For me, that felt unsafe. So there were times where I would act out and act in a way because that was what I was taught to learn how to survive. And so that was just something that kind of as I was reflecting, I'm like, okay, that makes sense because it was something that kept me safe. So I continued to do it. So when things would settle, I'd be like, okay, this is too chill. How can I spice things up a little bit? So, mental health often shows up as a behavior. So in foster care, mental health often presents as a behavior. What we might see as defiance could actually be self-protection. And what we label as disengagement may also be emotional shutdown. Hypervigilance, emotional outbursts, or withdrawal are not character flaws. They're adaptive responses to environments that were unpredictable or unsafe. And you know, in my role as a therapist, I often talk with many of my clients about, you know, if we do something for a certain amount of time, it starts to become kind of like muscle memory. Like we just do it the way that we've always done it. And so when we start to learn how to change behaviors or change routines, we're creating new neural pathways in our brain that basically are signaling like when X, we're gonna change it from Y to Z. So taking that time to actually like learn and be intentional and be aware makes such a huge difference. And oftentimes what we see is that when youth are acting out, it's a cry for help, or it's a way that they are normalizing or trying to reach like an equilibrium in whatever situation in a system that they often may feel like they have little to no control over. And there's been a lot of work that has been done over the years here and federally to help kind of ease that and increase voices. For example, the Idaho Youth Bill of Rights that was introduced many years ago, that was championed, and keeping siblings together. Like, these are all great things, but we still have a long ways to go. So with that, I'd like to transition to a moment of reflection. For folks online, feel free to join along and write this down. You never know if it could be something that helps kind of be your like North Star in how you show up and how you advocate for youth and care. So think of a young person you support, or if you are a young person, think about yourself maybe, who, when you or someone you know has displayed challenging behaviors, ask yourself, what if those behaviors made sense given what they've lived through? Is there any brave volunteer that wants to maybe share something that came to mind for them? Yeah. Hyper-independence? Absolutely. Learning to only really trust yourself. I mean, I think most people, whether you're in this room and you know me or watching online and you know me, I have been hyper-independent. And sometimes it's really hard to ask for help because that means you have to be vulnerable, right? Thank you. One more, possibly? Okay. This question alone can change how systems respond. What behaviors made sense given what a young person has lived through? I think that it helps us to maybe be less likely to pathologize or assign problematic language to a behavior that a youth may be exhibiting when they're in care. So kind of making a transition to lived experience. So when lived experience is paired with evidence, we get clarity. And my role as a therapist has actually given me language and research to explain what my younger self couldn't. The number of times that I am in my office with a client and I'm offering them, going back to that mirror analogy, I'm offering them advice. Then I spend the whole drive, I live in Nampa, I spend the whole drive home being like, are you doing that? Are you actually offering yourself the same advice that you're giving the people that are paying to come and see you to improve their well-being? And trauma impacts brain development, it impacts emotional regulation and relational trust. When we are consistently taught or told through actions or words that someone isn't safe, how are we supposed to trust anyone unless we kind of unlearn or learn how to be vulnerable? And this isn't just opinion, it's like well-established science. So, what the data tells us is that research consistently shows that children and youth in foster care experience significantly higher rates of mental health challenges than their peers. Some of these symptoms or diagnoses can include anxiety, depression, and trauma-related disorders. And without timely and appropriate support, these challenges often persist into adulthood, which can affect education, employment, and health outcomes. I don't know how many people in here are familiar with ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences. Youth in care often have a higher level of ACEs. And, back, I think when they started administering and kind of taking the inventory of adverse childhood experiences, they realized we can't tell someone how messed up they are without offering some sort of protective factor. What is the resiliency score? So then over time, they actually offered. Typically, when someone takes an ACEs, they're often taking the resiliency score immediately after, because the supports that you have, whether that be in school or at home or with other adults that are supportive and safe, it can kind of offset. But a higher ACEs score is often linked to higher levels of health concerns or higher levels of other concerning things that could take place. And also within that, when we look at how people are showing up based on a youth's behavior, like sometimes they're testing to see if you are safe. And so keeping in mind that mental health is so incredibly important, because if we aren't proactive and we're reactive, then that's setting that youth up not for great success or delayed success. And that's why access matters. So I'm going to get on my soapbox for a second. Long wait lists, provider shortages, and geographic barriers mean that many foster youth don't receive mental health care when they need it the most. And early intervention is one of the strongest predictors of positive outcomes, yet it is often the hardest to access. And when I think about mental health, particularly around foster youth, if we think about like a normal business or company that creates products, if the demand goes up, often they'll be like, okay, let's just make more things. When it comes to mental health specifically, if the demand goes up, like right now, where I think many would argue we are in a mental health crisis for various reasons, not going to get into it. But when the demand goes up, it doesn't mean that the number of therapists goes up. What it often means is that the caseloads are higher, which means, in turn, that the providers are exhausted. It also means that the level of care doesn't automatically mean it's going to, but could go down due to the exhaustion. In the Social Work Code of Ethics, it talks about impairment, and that can mean substances. But my interpretation of it is when you have so much going on and you're holding so much emotional labor because you have such a high caseload or client list, the level and quality of care can go down unless you're incredibly intentional and mindful of self-care practices. So this is my plug for anyone that wants to be a mental health therapist or has ever thought about it. There's a desperate need. Ooh. Yes, I already did that one. So when we talk about mental health care and how it works in relation to youth, something that I share when I'm in sessions with clients often, it happens in the first session because informed consent, I always tell them, you know, I'm here to support you. My role is to not do the work for you. My role is also to not tell you how to live your life. You're the expert of your own life. That being said, I also let folks know that, hey, give it a couple shots. If I'm not your person, that's okay. Because when someone is being vulnerable and making a decision to go into a complete licensed professional stranger's office, there may be personality differences. There may be different identities. There may be different cultures or subcultures that may or may not provide like what feels like open engagement, I guess is the best way that I could say it. So I think about just probably 3 years ago, as I was in my own therapeutic journey as a client, because every therapist needs a therapist, by the way. This was the first time that I had a provider that was a person of color. And that's so incredibly important because I felt like I didn't have to explain the things that I navigate on a daily basis. I didn't have to, I felt like she just got it. And so when we talk about mental health and how we're supporting our children, effective mental health care isn't just a one-size-fits-all. Children bring their cultures, whether they practice religion or not, whether they identify with a particular race or ethnicity, various identities that they may hold, family context, what is the family dynamic and how does that impact and influence how they view and experience the world? And they bring their lived experiences into care. You know, back when I was in school at Boise State working on my bachelor's in social work, we talked about the invisible backpack. And that's essentially like, what do we carry that nobody sees? I would argue that probably everyone in this room is carrying something that nobody else knows about. And so when you are in a space with a provider who you feel like you trust, and you feel like you can actually be open and not withhold anything, I feel like, at least in my professional experience, the level and the rate with which healing happens can be exponential. It all has to do with trust. And you can only, as a former coworker had shared with me, you can only move at the speed of trust. And if you move faster, oftentimes you can fracture that trust or have to put in additional work in order to remedy it. So when services reflect and respect those realities, engagement improves and outcomes follow. And this is about effectiveness and how do we support and create youth. It doesn't matter whether or not the environment they may have been in was safe. It was all they knew. And so if they are removed from their caregiver, that equals trauma. A new set of rules, a new set of routine. And so if we are making sure that we are being proactive in getting them the mental health care that they need, it shows effectiveness, not ideology. So trauma-informed care is not permissive or unstructured. It is evidence-based and accountability-driven, and it's outcome-focused. When I meet with a client, I ask them, what is the most important thing you want to get out of therapy? And then I build a master treatment plan around that, and we identify objectives. I joke with them and say, like, the master treatment plan, like, the goal is like the destination, and the objectives are like the roadmap or the navigation of how we're gonna get there. And we may not always get there, but any progress made, if it feels beneficial, is significant. So it includes like a shift in trauma-informed care. You know, when I worked, I trained foster parents for quite a few years, and trauma-informed care was at the tenet of every foster parent training. How do you show up? Instead of asking what's wrong with you, we should be asking what happened to you. Because the way that we show up is so incredibly influenced by our experiences, good, bad, and other. So when we ask the question, what happened to you versus what is wrong with you, it prioritizes safety, predictability, choice, and trust. And these elements are essential for healing, especially for children who have experienced repeated disruptions. You know, trauma-informed care for folks who may be caregivers of foster youth or bio parents of foster youth, that's like predictability, like what are all the steps? Obviously age appropriate, but like what are the steps? What are we doing next? What can you expect today? If a youth is placed in your home, give them a tour of the house. That's a way to optimize predictability. What is the layout? Where is the bathroom? Where is the kitchen? Where is the bedroom that I'm going to be staying in? And this is so important for youth who have been removed from homes that they were once in, because it offers a sense of autonomy and clarity so they don't have unanswered questions. So, what trauma-informed care is not, it is not permissive or did I just do this one? No, okay. So, yes, I did, just kidding, sorry. Got lost for a second. So with that, we're gonna transition to another reflection, and I'm not gonna have anyone mention anything. I just want you all to kind of think silently to yourselves. Where do systems ask children to adapt to instability rather than adapting systems to support children? This question helps us evaluate policies and practices through a mental health lens. And once again, whatever is coming to mind for you, that can also be a beacon for you when you are reflecting on or considering how you can best show up for youth in care. So we're going to talk a little bit about regulation. So one of the things when I was training foster parents that I learned, and I actually use in my office, so thank you, Ray, I think you're in here somewhere. Yes. We talk a lot about lid being flipped. And so if we look at our hand, we see this is our prefrontal cortex. This is the brain. This is our prefrontal cortex. This is our amygdala. Prefrontal cortex is primarily responsible for impulse control. It's responsible for proper decision making or thought out decision making. Our amygdala is often called what people will say the reptilian brain. This is what determines if you're in fight or flight, freeze or fawn mode. It also determines when you're breathing, when you're sleeping, you don't have to be hey, take a breath. It remembers. It does that for you so you don't have to consciously think about that. When our lid is flipped, and this doesn't just extend to children, it extends to adults, our reasoning is highly less likely to be effective because we're in that fight or flight response mode. How do I keep myself safe? What is going to help me get through this stressful situation? So when we're talking about our brain and we're talking about youth, when we are trying to regulate a youth, let's say that they are feeling a little dysregulated, they're presenting with emotional outbursts, stuff like that, we often trained foster parents about the 3 R's, and that's regulation, it's to regulate, then relate, then reason. And it's almost like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You can't really talk to someone who's frustrated or they're triggered or emotionally activated if their lid is flipped. So first we have to regulate. How do we get them to come down? What are the techniques that we can utilize to help them feel more calm or de-escalate? Then we need to relate to them. Hey, there have been times when I've been really upset or really feeling a lot of different feelings, and helping acknowledge and show them that it's okay to have these feelings. And then we reason, and then we talk about maybe the behavior could have resulted in an unsafe situation, or maybe the situation was something that they disagreed with, but you can't get anywhere really until their lid is closed and they're able to actually function. So regulation is borrowed from adults when children are seeing them. If you ever think about if you're hanging out with someone and they're really excited, a lot of times we get really excited. We feed off of each other's emotions. So if a youth is feeling dysregulated and you're dysregulated, sometimes we need to co-regulate together. And that will help model for the youth. Calm, consistent, emotionally attuned adults create environments where children can stabilize. And this applies to caregivers, caseworkers, educators, and clinicians alike. And with that, not only is mental health so incredibly important for youth in care, it's also important for everyone that's involved in the system. So supporting foster youth means supporting the adults around them. This includes caregivers, caseworkers, providers, social workers, and systems that also experience secondary stress. When we strengthen the adult capacity and their ability, children automatically benefit because you're able to show up for them in a space that feels maybe a little more grounded. And when mental health is supported and when mental health needs are addressed early and consistently, we see improved placement stability, better educational engagement, and stronger long-term outcomes. So prevention isn't just humane, it's also clinically proven to be more effective. There we go. When I think about my experience from ages 4 until I aged out of care here in the state of Idaho at 18, I think about the ways that I showed up and the ways that I was taught to be safe, some of which were not really safe, but they were safe for me in the moment. And access to mental health support didn't erase my past, but it did give me some tools to help understand it, and I'm still understanding it. The amount of things that I've had to navigate and go through is probably much more than most, and statistically, I shouldn't be where I am today. But having a mental health support consistently, it made it so that I can. And that's part of the reason why I've been so engaged in foster care, just in general. Because I feel like more people should be able to be where I am today. I think that the amount of experiences that I've had to learn how to overcome has set me up for success, but it also has taken a toll on my central nervous system. So having to be mindful and intentional. Mental health access helped me to build relationships, regulate emotions, and imagine a future beyond survival. And every youth, as they mature and grow into adults, should be able to thrive and not merely survive. Every young person deserves that chance. And within this, we all have a role. Whether you're a policymaker, provider, advocate, or community member, your role matters. Systems don't just change through awareness alone. They change through sustained commitment to mental health as a core component of care. So any lawmakers that may be watching or may be present, policies shape access. And we saw earlier when Christine was sharing the various bills, like get engaged if you're able to, and your schedule will allow. Whether you're a policymaker, advocate, or community member, it matters. And policies shape access, they also shape outcomes. When mental health services are prioritized and strengthened, futures can stabilize. And this is an investment to children, families, and communities, and the city and the state that we live in. If people are healthier, oftentimes they're going to be able to yield and do more things in the community and help lift the community up. For the community, action can take many forms. I kind of mentioned attending hearings, that's one. Reaching out to legislators, that's another. Supporting agencies like Idaho Voices for Children or Family Advocates or the various community organizations that uplift and promote family strengthening and supporting youth in need. It also can take action can take a form such as advocating for evidence-based practices or simply staying engaged and up to date in what's going on in your community. Mental health is literally everyone's responsibility. And a closing reflection that I'd like to offer, once again, this is just going to be silent, nobody needs to respond, but what would it look like if our systems assumed that children were worthy of care, stability, and healing from the start? That question can and should be guiding everything that we do. That being said, I had to put in a plug. I have a professional social media account, both TikTok and Instagram, that essentially speaks to some of the lessons that I've learned just in my experience as a being. I also speak a little bit from a therapeutic lens and just educational lens. So feel free to give me a follow if you'd like to check out kind of what I do on the side on top of the 400,000 other things that I do, going back to the hyper-productive thing that you mentioned earlier. But at this time, I would like to thank everyone for being here. You matter, and I would like to open it up for any questions. I'm an open book. But thank you for having me. And it doesn't have to be mental health focused if you just have a burning question. Okay, I'll make it too easy. Thank you.